Hello and welcome to this, the first video in a series of videos that I'm going to do on the Garmin Pilot electronic flight bag product. I've created these because I know that it's a pretty advanced navigation product, and Garmin have produced some pretty good documentation, but I know it's not everybody's favorite way to learn reading through manuals. So I thought I'd do something a little bit more interactive and create this series of videos. We'll try and follow the Garmin logic of plan, file, fly as we go through these lessons. Equally, if you've got any feedback on things that you'd like me to cover, it would be great if you could pop those in the comments below. Obviously, do the usual like and subscribe. And with that, I think we'll get started and have a look at how to get the application set up. Right, so let's delve straight in. I've got Garmin Pilot open here. I've got it at the moment in landscape mode. Obviously, you can run it in landscape or portrait mode as you prefer, but I've put it this way around just because it will display nicer for these videos, and also it makes all of the text in the menus clearly readable for you. So the first thing we're going to do is look into the settings for the product. Um, this is something that people often overlook, but there's a lot of basic stuff in the settings area. And if you get it right from the outset and understand how the application's set up, it stops it doing anything that might be confusing later down the line. So let's have a look at the settings menu. So we'll start off, we're in the settings general menu. The first bit's at the top, probably not massively interesting. We can look at what version of Garmin Pilot we're running. Um, New features in the version I'm currently running 25.1, and aviation product support. This is useful if you need to contact Garmin. gpfeedback@garmin.com is their email address, and they're usually pretty helpful. So where we really start to get into the bones of things that we want to set up is in the general settings. You can see I'm running Garmin Pilot on iOS. There's also Android versions. I'm going to stick to the iOS version. That's my preferred platform to run on. And I actually use an iPad that I pretty much dedicate just to running aviation type applications, so that I can try and assure the stability as much as possible. So we can change the theme. I tend to use the dark mode. Everybody seems to prefer that these days. Time format, UTC or standard, and the flight condition colors, whichever you prefer, really. I tend to leave them set to standard. I understand what they are. If we scroll down a little bit further, automatic safe taxi. This is a pretty cool feature. So what that will do is it will display the safe taxi charts either when you start taxiing on the ground, so you're at low speed, or after landing as you slow down below sort of 30 knots. We'll get the safe taxi diagrams will automatically pop up. And if you don't want that to happen, you can turn it off, but it's probably quite a good thing to have on. Show navigation info. Doesn't give you a lot of description here about what that does, so let me just show you. So we've got show navigation info on map on, and if we go back to the map page, you can see at the top of the screen here, we've got ground speed, altitude, etc., etc. And what we can do is, this is the navigation info that it's talking about. We can change those to show us really whatever we want to have um, in those various boxes. So they're pretty useful things to have. So I tend to leave those on, and I'll just show you if we go down to show navigation info on map and we turn it off. There we go, it's disappeared. So we'll turn that back on before I get confused on my next flight. And again, we can do those on flight charts. So if we open up some charts, what we got here, here we go, we've got an airfield diagram for an airport that I was at yesterday. And again, down the bottom of the screen this time, we've got the same information shown at the bottom of the screen. And if we didn't want to have that there, I suppose it's less useful. Maybe when you're looking at a chart and you want a bit more screen real estate, we can go along and turn that off. And then if we go back to our chart, those have disappeared. Okay, so what have we got up next? Prevent auto lock. So this setting prevents the screen from locking effectively on your device, so that the display is always visible to you, or not, however you prefer. If you have prevent auto lock while moving, once you're in the aircraft and moving, it doesn't lock. You could also set it to always, but then obviously beware of battery life constraints, or never, it will just lock as normal. The next one is radial menu display during flight, and we're going to have a look a lot more at the radial menu as we go through these videos, but I'll just show you quickly the radial menu and the difference between these settings. So if we look at the radial menu here, let's zoom in on something, not. If we long press on the screen, we get this radial menu up. Because we're not flying, we can only show terrain elevation, but if I move this around, we can see that the terrain elevation is changing. So you can either have the setting set to show terrain elevation or show estimated time en route, to the point that you've got the radial menu hovering over. Okay, so if we scroll down, the next area we get to is the flight planning settings. Auto resolve waypoints with duplicate identifiers. This is a super cool feature to leave turned on. Obviously, there's waypoints around the world with their VORs or NDBs that have duplicate identifiers because they were originally only 2 or 3 letters. And if we turn this on, it's going to pick the one that is most relevant to the route that we're planning. So it's going to stay close to the route and not send you off to the other side of the world. Apply speed restrictions. Certainly in the sort of GA flying that I do, this is probably not massively relevant. But what this does is if there is a speed restriction that's part of an instrument departure or an arrival route or a piece of airspace, Garmin Pilot will apply the speed restrictions and include that in the time for the flight planning. So probably it's a good idea to leave that turned on. Checklists, we'll come to checklists later on at some point, but the prompt before page change feature, up to you whether you leave it on or not. I'll just show you very quickly so we can have a look at what checklists are and what they do. So here's the checklist for a TB10. This is one of the aircraft that I fly, and let's pretend we're checking everything off. We'll get a page change. Okay, so if we complete the taxi checklist, there we go. We see we get a checklist complete. And this is the prompt before page change, and it opens Safe Taxi. If we'd had the setting here as off, it would have just automatically gone through without prompting us. So I tend to carryover annotations. Let's have a look. So let's have a look at a chart. So here we are, we've got a chart that I did add some annotations to yesterday. We'll go into how to do that later on as we start to look through the flying part of the series. But if you leave the setting to carry those over, if the chart was updated through any of the update processes, it would leave the annotations as they are, or you could choose to not carry over annotations if the chart changes. Runway preferences. This is used for the emergency function, or for finding nearest airfields. So it will present to you if we use the nearest function. So it's here. So the airfields being presented with the nearest function are matching the parameters that we have set here. So it's way of 500 meters. Decode NOTAM text. anything we can get to help us with making NOTAMs easier to read is a good idea, so I leave that turned on. And it's just attempting to put some of the abbreviations and acronyms into plain language. Ownship. So this is how we can present how our aircraft displays when we're uh, on the map. So we can turn it off, or we can make it small, medium, large, and we can change one of these different variants. Next up, we've got whether or not to show helicopter obstacles. Obstacles below 200 feet AGL are not interesting in my kind of flying, but if they are to you, you can turn that on. Synthetic vision we'll have a look at later as well as we get into flying. So this is a synthetic vision display that the platform gives us, and whether you're using roll indication as sky pointer or ground pointer, you probably want to match that to your avionics. Hide the emergency function when not flying. This tends to be how I leave it, because otherwise you probably wouldn't need it at the planning stage. But you can see how that looks like here. The emergency feature is pretty cool. And we'll look at that when we're flying as well, but you'll see it's brought up some airfields near to where I'm sitting recording this, and it's also started to take us to the emergency checklist. But I tend to have that set. I only want to see that. Reset all usage tips. Garmin does have a bunch of tips that are based in the product. So if you're using a feature that you've not been into before, it'll actually display tips. And obviously, as you read the tips, it hides them the next time you go into that area. So if you want to put them all back on again, you can use the reset function there. Interface style, we'll have a quick look at that. So I prefer what they call the home menu style. So if we go to the home, we've got all these very big icons, and I like this because it looks very similar to the touch display on my Garmin avionics. And we can rearrange where these icons go in a similar way to rearrange icons in iOS. We just press and hold, and then we get the ability to move them around or remove them completely. And I'll show you what the other menu looks like. I call it the for flight setting. So you can go into tab bars. So instead of the home menu, we've got these bars. And again, we have the option to move and remove things that we don't need. We go drag that across. The menu, whichever you prefer. And then we've got backups. So effectively the software backs up the settings that we've set, and if we needed to, if you installed Garmin Pilot on another device, you can restore from the backup, so you get back all these settings that we're setting up in our preferences that we like, and we can get those straight back again. So that takes us through the main part of the first of the settings menus, and we'll delve into a few more in a second. Okay, so now let's take a look at the pilot info page. So this is actually quite important, particularly if you're going to use Garmin Pilot for flight plan filing. We definitely need to have completed our details. But also, so there's some useful features around weather minima that can help at the flight planning stage. So let's go and add a new pilot here. So we've got some mandatory fields we need to create. And then we see these personal minimums sections down here. So what we can do here is put some things. So for our VFR minima might be a 1500-foot cloud ceiling, 7,000 meters visibility, and at night we might want some different settings. And there we go. We can do that for VFR. We can do that for IFR, and also we can set our crosswind components. So we might say 18 knots of crosswind for an arrival, but we're happy with 25 for departure. And then when we're using that pilot in the planning stage, if there are any weather conditions for the airports that we're arriving or departing from that are below those minima, we'll get a warning. So that's kind of a useful thing to have set up. Okay, so the next item down is the aircraft section, and I'm going to come back to this on a later video because this is a little bit more involved setup. So we'll come back to that one. User content, so this is where any waypoints that we've created ourselves will be stored, and we can obviously delete them out of here if they're no longer needed, for instance. I'll just quickly show you how to create a user waypoint here. So if we go across to the map, the easiest way to create one is just to find a point on the map, and we'll create a user waypoint called Worcester. And that's created it exactly lat and long as we created it there. Down, north, Gloucester. And then if we go back in here, we'll see we've got Worcester here. And if we didn't want that, we could delete that out. Also, if we wanted to, we could add a user waypoint completely manually. So we could create a point, and if we knew the lat and long, we could enter those manually, or we can do the bearing and distance from a VOR, or we could do a radial from two different VORs. But probably the easiest way to do it is to just find the point you're looking for on the map. Also, we have the possibility to export all of our user waypoints, and we can send those as an email or attach them to a message or save them to files or airdrop them. The other thing that we can do if we want to is we can get a template spreadsheet, which gives us the format that Garmin wants so that we can re-import waypoints if we wished. So the next thing that we can take a look at is the alerts function. So in here, we've got various different alerts that we can get through Garmin Pilot for various different flight phases. The main mechanism for alerting is a visual pop-up during flight. But you also have right down the bottom here, we have the ability to do audio alerts. This is very dependent on whether you connect the device that you're using in flight either to your headset audio or to the audio panel in the aircraft, as to whether they're useful or not. I tend to have it connected to the audio panel in the aircraft, and then we can choose a voice for the alerts. The main section of the alerts, so we can have terrain alerts on or off. I tend to leave that on. The terrain function works really well. It does suppress the alerts when you're close to an airport and potentially landing the aircraft. Terrain markers on the map, I tend to leave on, so that shows high points on your route. Traffic alerts obviously require some sort of a traffic source, and we'll have a look at that when we get into setting up device connectivity. And weather alerts, so this is going back to the weather minima that we set for our pilot profile. So if you have set those, you probably want to know whether an airfield or weather en route has gone below minimums. And then airspace alerts, so we can get alerted to airspace while we're en route. And there's every sort of airspace that you could imagine here. So you need to turn these on or off depending on your type of flying. Um, some I have turned off because otherwise you can just get saturated with alerts. Talking of getting saturated with alerts, we can also configure a horizontal and vertical distance of separation before the alert will actually pop up. And then we have the ability to turn on or off audio alerts for airspace separately to the other alerts such as terrain or traffic. The next item to take a look at is units. This is fairly self-explanatory. So just select the units that are reasonable for the sort of flying you do in the area of the world that you're in. Some of these are relevant to configuring aircraft. Some are just due to general flying. It's worth knowing where these are and just getting them correct for your usage just before we go into setting up the flight planning and aircraft configurations. Subscriptions is where we can optionally manage our Garmin Pilot account. Um, so this is where you can see what subscriptions you've got. It's possible to manage and purchase subscriptions from here. I tend to do it on a big screen on the computer, but it is possible to do it from here if you want to. I'm obviously presuming here that you've already signed up for Garmin Pilot. If you're just looking at this video to understand the features and you want some detail on how to sign up and what the various subscriptions offer, drop a note in the comments and I'll do a separate little mini video on that. After subscriptions, we've got various integrations that Garmin offers with third-party products. So we've got flightplan.com. I've never used this because it's a North American only service. Perhaps if somebody in the US would like to partner up and we could have a look at how that works, that would be great. Feel free to contact me. And we can also do an integration with Jeppsesen charts, but we'll come back to that in another session. Okay, so moving on to this documents area, I think this is a really great feature that Garmin have added. So it enables us to integrate with Dropbox, iCloud. I think maybe on the Android devices, there's some other options as well, and also with Jeppesen. There's a really important feature here, automatically download documents. You probably want to make sure that that's turned on because otherwise you may find that something that you've been using on the ground is not necessarily available in flight, and you may well want it to be. So let's just have a quick look into how the iCloud Drive integration works. That's the main one that I use. So effectively in my iCloud Drive, we end up with this Garmin Pilot folder here. And this is a great way just to, if you're working on another device and you want to add some documents that are useful in flight, you can drop them into the Garmin Pilot folder. And then when we go back to Garmin Pilot and we pop over here to the documents area, all of those documents that we could see are also available here. And I find this really useful for storing documents that may not be part of the AIP, particularly for some small airfields that might have published their own documents. This is a great way to have them available in flight. So data services, I think this is more of an informational display rather than a settings, but just so we're aware that it's there, so we can see, because I'm connected to the internet, Garmin weather data services are available and updating. Garmin Connect, we'll have a look at when we talk about devices and other integrations. Garmin's really good, certainly with connecting to their own devices and third-party devices to get data into our Garmin Pilot app so that we can use it in flight. And then finally, we can even integrate Garmin Pilot with X-Plane and Microsoft Flight Simulator. So that's kind of useful for either training for using Garmin Pilot. You can see how things would work in the air if you have a simulator, or indeed you can just enhance your simulator experience. So there we go. That concludes our look through of the Garmin Pilot settings. And in the next videos, we'll have a look at some more of the features. I think the next video will have a really good delve into how the mapping feature works in Garmin Pilot and understand all of the displays because it's very well featured. Thanks for watching, and please leave me some feedback. I'd like to make these videos as useful as possible. So leave comments, like and subscribe, and come back and watch the next episode.